If someone told me 6 months ago that I'd be standing in my own boardroom signing the deed to purchase Sunset Manor nursing home while my 3 children waited in the lobby below, I would have laughed. But here I am, watching my lawyer slide the final papers across the mahogany table, and the only thing I'm laughing about is how perfectly this worked out. You see, when your own kids decide you're too much trouble and dump you in a care facility without asking, they probably shouldn't choose the one place where you spent 30 years building relationships in the healthcare industry. They definitely shouldn't underestimate a woman who taught them everything they know about business. And they absolutely shouldn't assume that being 72 means being powerless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Dovie Miller, and I'm about to tell you how I went from being abandoned by my children to owning their visiting privileges. It started on a Tuesday morning in March when I was still living in my own home, still driving my own car, still managing my own life just fine. Thank you very much. I was in my kitchen grinding coffee beans and listening to the morning news when I heard multiple car doors slamming in my driveway. Through the window, I saw my 3 children walking up the front path like they were approaching a business meeting, not visiting their mother. Michael, my eldest at 48, wore his usual navy suit and carried a leather briefcase. He's always been the serious one, the planner, the one who thinks every problem has a spreadsheet solution. Behind him walked Sandra, 45, in her crisp white blouse and pearls, phone already pressed to her ear even though it was barely 8 in the morning. She's the organizer, the one who coordinates family gatherings like military operations and sends birthday cards exactly 2 weeks early every year. Bringing up the rear was my youngest, David, 42, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, eyes avoiding the house entirely. He's the sensitive one, the artist who never quite found his footing but always found his way to my kitchen table when life got overwhelming. Something about the way they walked told me this wasn't a social call. There was a formality to their movements, a distance that made my chest tight. I set down my coffee mug and walked to the front door, opening it before they could knock. "Good morning," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "This is a surprise. Come in, I'll put on more coffee." Michael stepped forward first, his jaw set, in that way it gets when he's about to deliver bad news. "Mom, we need to talk. Can we sit down?" I led them to the living room, the same room where I'd bandaged their scraped knees, helped with homework, and celebrated every milestone of their lives. They arranged themselves on the couch like a tribunal. Michael in the center, Sandra to his right, David to his left. I took my usual chair across from them, the one where I'd read them bedtime stories and later waited up for them to come home from day. "Mom," Michael began, opening his briefcase and pulling out a folder. "We've been talking and we're concerned about you living here alone." I blinked. Concerned about what, exactly? Sandra leaned forward, her voice taking on that patronizing tone she used with difficult clients. "You're 72, Mom. This house is too big for you. The stairs are dangerous, the maintenance is getting expensive, and after what happened to Mrs. Chen next door." "What happened to Mrs. Chen was a stroke, Sandra. She's recovering beautifully at her daughter's house in Portland." "But it could have been you," David said quietly, finally meeting my eyes. "What if something happens and nobody finds you for days?" I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't a conversation about my safety. This was an intervention, orchestrated and planned without my knowledge or consent. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Michael cleared his throat and opened the folder. "We've found a place for you. Sunset Manor. It's a beautiful facility, Mom. Full-service care, activities, people your own age. You'd have your own room, your own bathroom, and staff available 24 hours a day." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You found a place for me." "We've already put down a deposit," Sandra added quickly. "The room is available immediately. We can have you moved in by the weekend." I stared at them, these 3 people I'd raised, nursed through illnesses, supported through failures, celebrated through successes. They were discussing my life like I was an item on their to-do list, a problem to be solved and filed away. "Did it occur to any of you to ask me what I want?" "Mom, be reasonable," Michael said, his voice taking on that edge it got when he was losing patience. "You can't live in denial forever. You're getting older. Your reflexes aren't what they were. Last month you forgot to turn off the stove. I turned off the stove. I always turn off the stove. The burner was still on when I got here, Sandra said. I saw it myself. I remembered that day. I'd been making soup for a neighbor who'd just had surgery. I'd turned off the flame under the pot, but left the burner on low to keep the soup warm while I prepared the container. Sandra had arrived early, seen the blue flame, and immediately assumed I was becoming senile. I'd tried to explain, but she'd already made up her mind. I was keeping the soup warm, I said now, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. I explained that to you. Mom, David said gently. Maybe this isn't such a bad thing. Maybe it's time to let other people take care of you for a change. Let other people take care of me, as if I were already incapable, already diminished, already less than the woman who had raised them single-handedly after their father died, who had built a successful career in healthcare administration, who had put all three of them through college and helped them buy their first home. I looked at each of their faces, searching for some sign of the children I'd known, the ones who used to beg me not to leave them with babysitters, who cried when I went away on business trips, who called me their hero in Mother's Day cards. What if I say no? I asked. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Michael exchanged a look with Sandra, then turned back to me. Mom, we're not asking. We're telling you. The papers are already signed. The room is ready. This is happening. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting after sitting in the same position for too long. Get out! Mom! Get out of my house! Now! Sandra's face flushed. You're being unreasonable. We're trying to help you. Help me? I laughed. But there was no humor in it. You're trying to dispose of me. There's a difference. Michael stood too, closing the folder with a sharp snap. Fine. We'll give you a few days to think about it. But Mom, this is happening. Whether you cooperate or not, we have power of attorney. The words stopped me cold. What did you say? We filed for guardianship last month, Sandra said, her voice quiet but firm. The doctor said, you were showing signs of mild cognitive decline. We have the legal right to make decisions about your care. My doctor, Morrison, who I'd known for 15 years, who had treated my diabetes and my arthritis, and my occasional bouts of insomnia, who had apparently spoken to my children about my medical condition without my knowledge or consent. I made a mental note to have a very serious conversation with him about patient confidentiality. You filed for guardianship, I repeated slowly, without telling me. We didn't want to upset you, David said. Well, congratulations. I'm upset. They left then, Michael pausing at the door to say they'd be back on Friday, to help me pack. I stood in my living room, surrounded by 40 years of memories, and felt something I hadn't experienced since my husband died, complete and utter betrayal. But I also felt something else, anger, pure, clean anger that cut through the hurt like a blade. They thought they could manipulate me, control me, reduce me to a signature on a form. They thought being 72 meant being helpless. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I walked to my home office and opened my laptop. If they wanted to play hardball, they'd picked the wrong woman. I'd spent 3 decades working in healthcare administration, the last 10 as Senior Vice President of Operations for regional healthcare systems. I knew every regulation, every loophole, every way the system could be manipulated. I knew judges, lawyers, doctors, and administrators throughout the state. I knew how to fight dirty when I had to, and I'd never had to more than I did right now. The first call I made was to my attorney, Patricia Reeves, who had handled my estate planning and my husband's affair. She listened without interruption as I explained what had happened, then asked me to fax over any documents my children had left behind. Dovey, she said after reviewing the papers, I'm going to be straight with you. They do have a court order, but it's based on a very limited psychiatric evaluation. If we can prove you're mentally competent, we can challenge it, but that takes time, and they can force the move before we get a hearing. How long do I have? Based on this paperwork, they can execute the guardianship order anytime after 72 hours from service. That gives us until Friday, 3 days. I looked around my office, at the awards on the walls, the photos of groundbreaking ceremonies for hospitals I'd helped plan, the certificates and degrees that represented a lifetime of work, 3 days to prove I wasn't the confused old woman they'd painted me as. Patricia, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I need you to do something for me. I need you to look into Sunset Manor's ownership structure, who owns it, who runs it, what their financial situation looks like. Dovey, what are you thinking? I'm thinking that if my children want to play games with my life, they should be prepared for the consequences. The second call I made was to my old colleague Dr. Harrison Webb, who had been chief of geriatrics at Regional before retiring last year. He agreed to meet me that afternoon for an independent cognitive assessment, one that would hold up in court. The third call was to my financial advisor Robert Kim, who had been managing my investments since my husband's death. Robert, I need you to pull together a complete picture of my asset, everything, and I need you to do it quickly. Is everything all right, Dovey? Everything's about to be perfect. I spent the rest of the morning making calls, pulling strings, activating a network of professional relationships my children had never even known existed. They saw me as their aging mother, someone to be managed and contained. They had no idea that before I was their mother, I was Dovey Miller, the woman who had turned 3 failing hospitals into profitable enterprises, who had negotiated million-dollar contracts with insurance companies, who had testified before state legislative committees on healthcare reform. By the time I met Dr. Webb at his office that afternoon, I had a plan. It was audacious, probably crazy, and definitely expensive, but it was also the only way to ensure that my children would never again have the power to make decisions about my life without my consent. The cognitive assessment took 2 hours. Dr. Webb put me through a battery of tests, checking my memory, my reasoning ability, my capacity to make complex decisions. When we finished, he smiled and shook his head. Dovey, your cognitive function is better than most people half your age. I don't know what Dr. Morrison was thinking when he signed off on that guardianship petition, but it certainly wasn't based on any legitimate medical concerns. Will you testify to that? Absolutely. This is elder abuse. Plain and simple. I drove home feeling lighter than I had all day. My children thought they held all the cards, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated me. That evening, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and my laptop, researching everything I could find about Sunset Manor. What I discovered was fascinating. The facility had been struggling financially for years, caught between rising costs and declining reimbursement rates from Medicare and Medicaid. The current owners, a family named the Hendersons, had been trying to sell for months, but couldn't find a buyer willing to take on the debt and the regulatory headaches. I pulled up the facility's inspection reports, licensure documents, and financial filing. As someone who had overseen the operation of multiple healthcare facilities, I could read between the lines. Sunset Manor wasn't just struggling, it was failing. The staff turnover was high, the patient satisfaction scores were declining, and there had been several citations for regulatory violations in the past year. My children had chosen this place, not because it was the best option for my care, but because it was the cheapest option that would still allow them to tell their friends I was somewhere nice. They'd sacrificed my well-being for their convenience and their wallet. I opened a new browser window and began researching the Hendersons. Margaret Henderson, the current owner, had inherited the facility from her father 5 years ago. She lived in Florida now, had never worked in healthcare, and seemed to view Sunset Manor as nothing more than a burden she couldn't wait to shed. Perfect. The next morning, I called Margaret Henderson direct. She was surprised to hear from me, even more surprised when I told her I was interested in purchasing the facility. Mrs. Miller, I have to be honest with you, we've been trying to sell for 8 months. The financial situation is challenging. I understand. I have extensive experience in healthcare administration. I'm not afraid of challenges. We talked for an hour. By the end of the conversation, I had a preliminary purchase agreement and a promise that she would expedite the sale process. The asking price was steep, but not unreasonable given the real estate value and the potential for improvement under proper management. The next call was to Robert Kim. Robert, I need to liquidate some investments. Quickly. How quickly? I need the funds available for a wire transfer by tomorrow afternoon. Dovey, what are you buying? My freedom. Thursday morning, I was back at Patricia's office, signing documents and transferring funds. By noon, I was the proud owner of a struggling nursing home that needed significant investment to bring it up to the standards I expected. By evening, I was reviewing staff files and preparing for my first management meeting. Friday morning, my children arrived at my house right on schedule, a moving truck idling in the driveway behind them. They walked in like they owned the place, which I suppose they thought they did, legally speaking. Mom, Michael said, we're here to help you pack. The room at Sunset Manor is ready. I was sitting in my living room, dressed in my best suit, my hair perfectly styled, my makeup impeccable. I looked every inch the successful businesswoman I'd always been, not the confused elderly woman they'd described in their court filing. I'm ready, I said, standing and picking up my purse. They looked surprised. Sandra frowned. Ready? You're not fighting this. I've decided you're right. It's time for me to go to Sunset Manor. David looked relieved. Michael looked suspicious. Sandra looked like she was trying to figure out what she'd missed. Well, Michael said slowly, that's great, Mom. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. Oh, I'm being very reasonable. We rode to Sunset Manor in silence, my children's cars following the moving truck. I sat in the passenger seat of Michael's BMW, watching the familiar streets of my neighborhood disappear behind us. When we pulled into the circular drive of the nursing home, I smiled. This is it, Sandra said, getting out of her car. Your new home? Yes, I said. It is. The front entrance of Sunset Manor was modest, but clean, with large windows and a covered porch where a few residents sat in wheelchairs enjoying the morning sun. The building itself was a sprawling single-story structure, built in the 1980s and showing its age, but still solid and functional. Inside, the lobby was decorated in soothing pastels, with comfortable seating areas and a reception desk staffed by a young woman who looked up as we entered. Good morning, she said brightly. You must be Mrs. Miller. We've been expecting you. Yes, I said. I'm Mrs. Miller, but I think there's been some confusion about my room assignment. The receptionist looked puzzled. I'm sorry, I won't be staying in a resident room. I'll be using the administrator's office. I'm the new owner. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. My children stood frozen, their mouths open, their eyes wide with disbelief. I'm sorry, Sandra said finally. What did you say? I said I'm the new owner. I purchased Sunset Manor yesterday. The transfer of ownership was completed this morning. Michael's face went white, then red, then white again. That's impossible. You can't. You don't have the authority. Actually, I do. Your guardianship order gives you the right to make decisions about my medical care and my living situation. It doesn't give you the right to control my finances or my business decisions. I'm still a competent adult, despite what you told the court. I turned to the receptionist, who was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Please call an all-staff meeting for 2 o'clock. I'd like to introduce myself and discuss some changes we'll be implementing. Changes? David croaked. Oh yes, lots of changes, starting with visiting hours. I reached into my purse and pulled out a sheet of paper, handing it to Michael. These are the new visiting policies, effective immediately. Family members are welcome to visit between the hours of 2 and 4 p.m. on Sundays only, no exception. Sandra grabbed the paper and read it, her face growing redder with each word. You can't do this. This is insane. I can do this, and I am doing this. You wanted me to live here. Congratulations, your wish has been granted. But you seem to have forgotten that I'm still your mother, not your property, and now I'm also your landlord. Mom, please, David said, his voice breaking. We were just trying to help. No, you were trying to control me. You were trying to make me disappear, so you wouldn't have to deal with the inconvenience of an aging parent. You wanted to warehouse me somewhere you could visit when it was convenient, and forget about me when it wasn't. I looked at each of them, these 3 people I'd loved more than my own life, who had loved me once too, before I became an obligation instead of a person. You took away my choice, my autonomy, my dignity. You treated me like a problem to be solved instead of a human being to be respected. So now you get to live with the consequences. Michael's lawyer instincts kicked in. This won't hold up in court. We'll challenge the sale. Claim you weren't competent to make the decision. With what evidence? I had a comprehensive cognitive assessment done by Dr. Harrison Webb 2 days ago. I passed with flying colors. Every signature on every document is witnessed and notarized. Every financial transaction is properly documented. I have 3 decades of experience in healthcare administration, and a clean bill of mental health. What do you have? A rushed evaluation by a doctor who violated patient confidentiality to help you commit elder abuse. The words hit like physical blows. Michael stumbled backward, Sandra sat down heavily in one of the lobby chairs, and David just stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. This is what you taught me, I continued, my voice steady and calm. You taught me to fight for what I believe in, to stand up for myself, to never let anyone walk all over me. You taught me to be strong, to be smart, to be independent. Congratulations, I learned my lessons well. I turned back to the receptionist, who had been watching this family drama unfold with wide eyes. Please show me to my office, I have work to do. As I walked away, I heard Sandra calling my name, her voice choked with tears. I heard Michael demanding to speak to a lawyer, and David asking if we could just talk, please. Couldn't we just talk? I didn't turn around. I'd spent too many years turning around, going back, making excuses for their behavior, accepting their apologies, pretending their casual cruelty was just family dynamics. I was done turning around. The administrator's office was spacious and well-appointed, with a large desk, built-in bookshelves, and windows overlooking the facility's garden. I sat down in the leather chair behind the desk and looked out at the grounds, already mentally planning improvements. There was a knock on the door. Come in, I called. A woman in her 50s entered, wearing scrubs, and a name tag that identified her as Janet, the head nurse. She looked nervous, but determined. Mrs. Miller, I'm Janet Kowalski. I wanted to welcome you to Sunset Manor, and let you know that the staff is looking forward to working with you. Thank you, Janet. I'm looking forward to working with all of you. I understand there have been some challenges here. Yes, ma'am. The previous owner, they weren't really invested in the facility. Staff morale has been low, and we've been struggling with resources. That's going to change. I have 40 years of experience in healthcare, and I know what it takes to run a quality facility. We're going to make some improvement. Janet smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen since arriving. The residents and staff will be so happy to hear that. Good. Now I have a question for you. What do you know about visiting policies? Well, currently, families can visit anytime between 8 a.m. and 8. That's changing. I'm implementing new policies that will be posted by the end of the week. May I ask why? I looked out the window again, where I could see my children's cars still parked in the circular drive. Sometimes, families need to learn boundaries, and sometimes, the best way to teach boundaries is to enforce them. That afternoon I held my first staff meeting in the facility's main conference room. 32 employees attended, from housekeeping staff to licensed nurses, to the activities coordinator. I looked around the room at their faces, some hopeful, some skeptical, all of them tired from working in a facility that had been slowly dying for years. My name is Dovie Miller, I began, and as of this morning, I'm the new owner of Sunset Manor. I want to start by saying that I didn't buy this facility to make money. I bought it to make a difference. I spent the next hour outlining my vision for the facility, the improvements I planned to make, the investment I was prepared to put into both the physical plant and the staff. I announced immediate pay raises for all employees, improved benefits, and a commitment to maintaining full staffing levels. I know this facility has struggled in recent years, I said, but I also know that every person in this room chose to work in healthcare, because you care about people. You want to make a difference in their lives. I'm here to give you the tools and resources to do that. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Janet raised her hand.
Mrs. Miller, the residents have been asking about you. They're curious about the new owner. I'll introduce myself to them individually over the next few days. I want to meet everyone who lives here, learn their stories, understand their needs. After the meeting, I walked the halls of Sunset Manor, introducing myself to residents and their families. I stopped by the physical therapy room, the dining hall, The activities room where a group of women were working on a puzzle. Everywhere I went, I took notes, mental and physical, about what needed to be improved. In the memory care unit, I met a woman named Rose, who reminded me of my own mother. She was sitting by the window looking out at the garden, her hands folded in her lap. When I introduced myself, she smiled. "Are you the new lady?" she asked. "Yes, I am. I'm Dovey. I like your hair. It's very professional." I laughed. "Thank you. I try to look professional. My daughter used to look professional. She was a lawyer. Haven't seen her in a while." I sat down beside her. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Oh, it's all right. People get busy, but I wish she'd visit more." I thought about my own children, probably still sitting in the parking lot, trying to figure out what had just happened. Sometimes families need reminders about what's important. "Yes," Rose said softly. "Sometimes they do." That evening, I had dinner in the facility's dining room with the other residents. The food was adequate, but uninspiring, another item on my list of improvements. After dinner, I returned to my office to review files and financial reports. There was a knock on my door around 8 o'clock. Janet peeked in. "Mrs. Miller, your son is here. He's asking to see you." "Which son?" "The younger one. David." I considered sending him away, but curiosity got the better of me. "Send him in." David entered the office, looking like he'd been crying. His eyes were red, his hair disheveled, his usual confident demeanor completely shattered. He sat down across from my desk without being invited. "Mom, I need to apologize." "For what, specifically?" For the guardianship petition, for not asking what you wanted, for treating you like you were already gone, instead of still here, still our mother." I leaned back in my chair, studying his face. "Go on." "I've been sitting in the parking lot for hours, trying to figure out how we got here, and I keep coming back to the same thing. We were scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared of losing you. Scared of watching you get older and weaker and eventually die. It was easier to put you somewhere where professionals could take care of you, where we didn't have to see you struggling, where we could pretend everything was fine." I felt something loosen in my chest. "Just a little. So you decided to lose me first, on your own terms." "I guess we did, and it was stupid, and selfish, and wrong." "Yes, it was." He looked around the office, taking in the professional diplomas on the walls, the management books on the shelves, the evidence of a career his children had somehow forgotten about. "I forgot who you were before you were our mom. I forgot that you were successful and strong and smart. I didn't forget. I just needed you to remember." "Mom, is there any way we can fix this? Any way to go back?" I thought about it for a long moment. "David, you can't go back. None of us can. But you can go forward. You can learn from this. You can do better." "How?" "By respecting me. By treating me like the adult I still am, not the child you think I've become. By asking instead of assuming. By listening instead of deciding." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Can I hug you?" I stood up and walked around the desk. He wrapped his arms around me, and for just a moment, he was my little boy again, the one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who brought me flowers from the neighbor's garden, who cried when I had to travel for work. "I love you, Mom. I'm sorry it took this for me to show it properly. I love you too, David. But love isn't enough. Respect is what matters now." He pulled back, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "What happens now? Now you go home. You think about what you've learned, and maybe, if you're very lucky, you get to start over. What about Michael and Sandra? They'll have to find their own way to make amends. I can't do it for them." After David left, I sat in my office for a long time, looking out at the parking lot where my children's cars had been. The space was empty now, lit by security lights that cast long shadows across the asphalt. I thought about the residents sleeping in their rooms, some of them probably wondering if their own children would visit this week, this month, this year. I thought about the staff, working night shifts to provide care for people whose families had either forgotten them or found them too inconvenient to manage. I thought about my own children, driving home to their comfortable houses, their successful careers, their busy lives. I wondered if they were thinking about me, if they were beginning to understand what they'd done, what they'd lost, what they might still be able to regain. Tomorrow I would begin the real work of transforming Sunset Manor into the kind of place I would want to live, the kind of place any parent would be proud to call home. I would hire new staff, improve the food service, upgrade the physical plant, and create programs that would make this facility a model for senior care. But tonight, I was simply a mother who had taught her children the hardest lesson of all, that love without respect is just another form of control, and that sometimes the people who claim to be protecting you are the ones you need protection from. I picked up my phone and dialed the front desk. Janet, this is Mrs. Miller. I'd like you to post the new visiting policy on the bulletin board first thing tomorrow morning, and make sure copies are sent to all family members on file. Yes, ma'am. Is there anything else? Yeah, I want you to know that things are going to be different around here. Better, for everyone. I'm looking forward to it, Mrs. Miller. So am I, Janet. So am I. I hung up the phone and looked around my new office, my new home, my new life. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was the life I'd chosen, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Outside my window the garden was dark, but I could see the outline of the benches where residents sat during the day, the walking paths where they took their exercise, the small pond where they fed the fish. Tomorrow I would walk those paths myself, not as a visitor or a patient, but as someone who belonged here, someone who had chosen to be here on her own terms. My children had tried to put me away, to warehouse me, to make me disappear from their lives. Instead, they'd given me the opportunity to create something new, something better, something that would serve not just me, but all the other parents who found themselves in similar situations. The visiting policy I'd implemented was harsh, but it was also necessary. My children needed to learn that their mother was not a problem to be solved, but a person to be respected. They needed to understand that love was not about control but about trust, not about convenience, but about commitment. Maybe someday they would understand. Maybe someday they would earn back the privilege of being my children, not just my biological offspring but my chosen family. But that would have to be their choice, their effort, their commitment to change. For now, I had work to do, a facility to run, residents to care for, staff to support. I had a life to live, on my own terms, in my own way, with my own rules, and for the first time in a very long time, I was exactly where I wanted to be. The next morning, I woke up in my administrator's office, which I'd converted into a temporary living space, while I decided whether to build a proper apartment on the grounds, or find a house nearby. The sun was streaming through the windows, and I could hear the sounds of the facility coming to life, staff arriving for their shifts, breakfast being prepared, residents beginning their day. I showered in the private bathroom attached to the office, dressed in another professional suit, and walked to the dining room for breakfast. Several residents looked up as I entered, and I made a point of stopping at each table to introduce myself and ask how they were doing. At one table, I met Harold, a retired mechanic, who had built hot rods in his garage until arthritis made it impossible to work with his hands. At another, I met Eleanor, a former teacher who had raised 6 children and now saw them only on holiday. At a third, I met Frank, a widower who had moved to the facility after his son decided he couldn't manage living alone anymore. Each of them had a story, a life that had been full and meaningful before age or illness or family decisions had brought them here. Each of them deserved better than the bare minimum care they'd been receiving. After breakfast, I called a meeting with the department heads. We gathered in the conference room, and I spread out architectural plans I'd had drawn up overnight by a firm I'd worked with in my previous career. These are the improvements we're going to make over the next 6 months, I announced. New flooring in all the common areas, updated kitchen equipment, a completely renovated therapy room, and a new activities center with space for art classes, music programs, and educational lectures. Janet studied the plans with growing excitement. Mrs. Miller, this is incredible, but the cost. Don't worry about the cost, worry about the timeline. I want to start construction next week. What about the residents? Where will they go during the renovation? Nowhere. We're going to do this in phases.
one section at a time with minimal disruption to their daily routines. These people have been displaced enough in their lives, they're not going anywhere. I spent the rest of the morning meeting with contractors, suppliers and equipment vendors. By noon I had commitments for all the major renovation work, and a timeline that would have everything completed by the end of summer. That afternoon, I was in my office reviewing staff schedules when Janet knocked on the door. "Mrs. Miller, there's someone here to see," says she's your daughter, Sandra. I'd been wondering when she would show up. "Send her in." Sandra entered the office looking like she'd spent the night in her car. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, her clothes wrinkled. She sat down across from my desk without being invited, just as David had done the night before. "Mom, we need to talk." "About what?" "About this insanity, about what you've done, about how we're going to fix it." I leaned back in my chair. "I haven't done anything that needs fixing. I've solved a problem." Sandra's face was flushed with anger and exhaustion, her perfectly manicured hands clenched into fists on my desk. She looked like a woman who had spent her entire adult life believing she could control any situation through sheer force of will, only to discover that some battles couldn't be won with spreadsheets and aggressive negotiations. "You've humiliated us," she continued, her voice rising. "Do you have any idea what this looks like? What people are going to say when they find out our mother bought a nursing home just to spite us?" I picked up a pen and made a note on the pad beside me, deliberately taking my time before responding. "People are going to say that Dovie Miller made a smart business investment in a growing industry. They're going to say she recognized an opportunity and acted on it decisively. They're going to say she's still the same sharp businesswoman she's always been. They're going to say you've lost your mind." Are they? Because the bank didn't seem to think I'd lost my mind when they approved the loan. The state licensing board didn't think I'd lost my mind when they approved the ownership transfer. The staff here doesn't think I've lost my mind. In fact, the only people who seem to think there's something wrong with my mental faculties are the same people who filed fraudulent guardianship papers based on a doctor's assessment that violated about 6 different ethical guidelines. Sandra's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Dr. Morrison said you were showing signs of cognitive decline." Dr. Morrison said I was asking too many questions about my medications and seemed confused about my insurance coverage. "That's not cognitive decline, Sandra. That's called being an informed patient. But you heard what you wanted to hear because it supported what you wanted to do." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where several residents were taking their morning walk along the paved pathway. "Do you know what I've learned in the past 48 hours? I've learned that every single person living in this facility has a story just like mine. Children who decided their parents were too much trouble. Families who convinced themselves they were doing the right thing by warehousing their elderly relatives somewhere they didn't have to see them declining. That's not what we were doing." I turned back to face her. When was the last time you spent more than an hour at my house, Sandra? When was the last time you called me just to talk, not because you needed something? When was the last time you asked me about my life, my interests, my plans for the future?" She stared at me, and I could see her searching for an answer that wouldn't prove my point. "We've all been busy. You know that. Michael has the promotion at the firm. I have the new clients. David has his art commission." "Yes, you've all been very busy building your lives while assuming mine was winding down. You've been so busy that you forgot I still had a life to live." "Mom, you're 72 years old, you have diabetes and arthritis, you live alone in a house that's too big for you. We were worried about your safety. Were you, or were you worried about your liability? Were you worried about what would happen if I fell and hurt myself and sued you for negligence? Were you worried about what would happen to your inheritances if I had to go into long-term care and depleted my assets paying for it?" The color drained from Sandra's face. "How can you say that? How can you think we— Because, Sandra, you've spent the last 3 years asking me about my estate planning. You've questioned every major purchase I've made, every trip I've taken, every gift I've given to charity. You've treated my money like it was already yours, just temporarily in my custody until I had the courtesy to die and hand it over." I sat back down and pulled out a folder from my desk drawer.
Would you like to know what I discovered when I reviewed my financial records after your little intervention? In the past 2 years, you've collectively borrowed over $30,000 from me. Michael's down payment on his boat, Sandra's daughter's private school tuition, David's art studio rent when his gallery sales fell through. None of you have paid back a penny, and none of you seem to think you needed to. Sandra's hands were shaking now. Those were emergencies. Family helps family. Family asks family. Family doesn't assume family. And family certainly doesn't manipulate family into giving up their independence so they can gain access to their bank accounts. I opened the folder and spread out several documents. These are the financial records for Sunset Manor for the past 5 years. Do you know what they show? They show a facility that's been slowly declining, because the previous owners were more interested in extracting profit than investing in quality care. They show a business that could be incredibly successful with proper management and adequate funding. Mom, I don't understand what you're trying to prove. I'm trying to prove that I'm not the confused old woman you portrayed to the court. I'm trying to prove that I'm still capable of making complex business decisions, analyzing market opportunities, and executing long-term strategic plans. I'm trying to prove that when you filed for guardianship, you weren't protecting me from my declining faculties. You were protecting yourselves from having to deal with an independent woman who might not do what you wanted her to do. Sandra leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. What do you want from us? I want you to acknowledge what you did. I want you to admit that you tried to take away my autonomy not because I couldn't handle it, but because it was inconvenient for you. I want you to understand that respect isn't something you give to people when it's easy. It's something you give to people especially when it's hard. And if we do that, if we acknowledge that we made mistakes, then maybe we can start rebuilding a relationship based on honesty instead of manipulation. But Sandra, that's going to require you to see me as a person, not as a problem. It's going to require you to accept that I have the right to make my own decisions, even if you don't agree with them. She was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks, her carefully constructed facade finally cracking. I'm scared, Mom. I'm scared of losing you. You've already lost me, Sandra. The question is whether you're willing to do the work to find me again. A knock on the door interrupted us. Janet peeked in, looking apologetic. Mrs. Miller, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation in the memory care unit. What kind of situation? Mrs. Patterson is asking for her daughter again. She's getting agitated, and we can't seem to calm her down. I stood up immediately. I'll be right there. I turned to Sandra. We'll have to continue this conversation later. I have residents who need my attention. Mom! Wait, no, Sandra. For the first time in years I have somewhere I need to be that isn't about what you want or need. I have responsibilities that matter to people who depend on me. You can wait. I left her sitting in my office, and followed Janet down the hallway to the memory care unit. Miss Patterson was indeed agitated, pacing back and forth in the common area, clutching a photograph of a young woman. She's coming today, Mrs. Patterson was saying to anyone who would listen. My daughter's coming today. She promised she'd come today. I approached her slowly, keeping my voice calm and gentle. Hello, Mrs. Patterson. I'm Dovie Miller. Can you tell me about your daughter? She looked at me with eyes that were clear for just a moment. She's a lawyer, very important, very busy, but she's coming today. That's wonderful. What's her name? Susan. Susan. Patricia Patterson Wells. She has her father's eyes and my stubborn streak. Mrs. Patterson smiled, her agitation calming slightly. She used to bring me roses from her garden, pink ones, my favorites. I looked at the photograph in her hand. It showed a woman in her 30s or 40s, professionally dressed, standing next to an older version of Mrs. Patterson in what looked like a graduation photo. She looks lovely, I said. Tell me more about her. For the next 20 minutes, Mrs. Patterson told me about her daughter's childhood, her career, her marriage, her children. She spoke with the kind of pride that only a mother can have, even as her memory drifted between past and present, reality and hope. When she finally settled down, I walked with her to her room, and helped her into her favorite chair by the window. Mrs. Patterson, would you like me to try to call Susan for you? Her face lit up. Would you? Oh, that would be wonderful. Tell her I'm waiting for her. Tell her I have cookie. I made a note to check Mrs. Patterson's file for her daughter's contact information. As I was leaving the memory care unit, I nearly collided with Sandra, who had apparently been following me. Mom, who was that? A resident. She has dementia, and gets confused about when her daughter is coming to visit. When did her daughter visit last? I checked the visitor log on the wall. According to this, not in the past 6 months. Sandra was quiet for a long moment. She seemed so sad. She is sad. She's lonely, and confused and abandoned by the person she loves most in the world, just like about half the residents here. We walked back toward my office in silence. When we reached the administrative wing, Sandra stopped and turned to me. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. All right, are you doing this to punish us? The visiting restrictions, buying this place, all of it. Are you trying to hurt us the way we hurt you? I considered the question carefully. Sandra, if I wanted to punish you, I would have simply disappeared. I would have sold my house, liquidated my assets, and moved somewhere you'd never find me. I would have left you wondering for the rest of your lives whether I was alive or dead, safe or suffering. That would have been punishment. Then why are you doing this? I'm doing this because I refuse to disappear. I refuse to be managed and contained and forgotten. I'm doing this because I still have value to offer the world, and I'm not going to let anyone convince me otherwise. And yes, I'm doing this to teach you a lesson, but not out of spite. I'm doing it out of love. I don't understand, Sandra. You have a 15-year-old daughter. In a few years, she's going to start making decisions you don't like. She's going to want independence you're not ready to give her. She's going to challenge your authority and question your judgment. When that happens, what are you going to do? I lied. I don't know. Try to guide her, I suppose. Try to keep her safe. And if she pushes back, if she insists on making her own mistakes, I guess I'd have to let her. Eventually. Why? Because that's how she'll learn to be an adult. Because she has to be allowed to make her own choices, even if I think they're wrong. Exactly. And that doesn't stop being true just because someone gets older, Sandra. It doesn't stop being true when someone reaches 60 or 70 or 80. The right to make your own choices, your own mistakes, your own life decisions. That's not something you lose when you get old. It's something your children tried to take from me. Sandra sat down heavily in one of the chairs outside my office. We thought we were helping. I know you did. But help that comes without consent isn't help. It's control, and control that comes from love is still control. So what happens now? How do we fix this? You start by accepting that you can't fix this for me. You can only fix yourselves. You can only change how you treat me going forward. The visiting restrictions stay in place until I decide otherwise. Not because I want to hurt you, but because I need to know that you understand this is my decision to make. I need to know that you respect my right to set boundaries, even boundaries you don't like. Sandra nodded slowly. Can I ask you something else? Of course. Are you happy here? I mean, really happy? Or are you just trying to prove a point? I looked around at the hallway where we were standing, at the cheerful artwork on the walls, at the staff members walking by with genuine smiles on their faces. Sandra, I've spent the last 24 hours doing work that matters. I've made decisions that will improve the lives of 37 residents and their families. I've solved problems, implemented solutions, and used skills I've spent 40 years developing. For the first time since your father died, I feel like I have a purpose. But you could have found purpose without buying a nursing home. Could I? Where? Doing what? Volunteering at the library, taking art classes at the senior center, playing bridge with women who spend their time complaining about their children. I shook my head. Sandra, you and your brothers didn't just try to put me in a nursing home. You tried to put me out to pasture. You tried to convince me that my productive years were over, that my contributions to the world were finished, that all I had left was to gracefully decline, and try not to be too much trouble for anyone. We never said that. You didn't have to say it. You said it when you assumed I couldn't manage my own finances. You said it when you decided I was too old to live in my own home. You said it when you filed legal papers claiming I was no longer competent to make my own decisions. You said it every time you talked about me instead of to me. Every time you made plans for my life without asking what I wanted. I stood up and unlocked my office door. Come in. I want to show you something. Sandra followed me into the office where I had spread out the architectural plans for the facility renovations on my conference table. This is what I'm planning for Sunset Manor over the next 6 months, I said, pointing to the various diagrams and specifications. A complete renovation of the common areas, upgraded medical equipment, expanded therapy services, and a new educational program that will bring in university students to teach classes in everything from history to computer skills. Sandra studied the plans, her eyes widening as she began to understand the scope of what I was proposing. Mom, this is incredible. This is like creating a whole new kind of senior living facility. That's exactly what it is. It's a place where aging doesn't mean disappearing, where getting older doesn't mean getting invisible, where residents are treated like complete human beings with interests and capabilities and contributions to make, not just bodies to be kept comfortable until they die. How did you come up with all this so quick? I've been thinking about this for years, Sandra. Do you remember when your father was in the hospital before he died? Do you remember how frustrated I was with the way he was treated, not by individual nurses or doctors, who were wonderful, but by the system itself? The way it reduced him to a diagnosis instead of seeing him as a person. She nodded. You used to complain about how they talked about him like he wasn't in the room. Exactly. And I swore then that if I ever had the opportunity, I would create something better. I would create a place where people could age with dignity, where they could continue to learn and grow and contribute, where they wouldn't be warehoused or forgotten, or treated like problems to be managed. And you're doing this because we tried to put you in a nursing home. I'm doing this because you tried to put me in a nursing home, without asking me what I wanted. If you had come to me and said, Mom, we're worried about you living alone, can we explore some options together? This would be a very different conversation. If you had included me in the decision-making process, if you had respected my autonomy and my intelligence, we might have found a solution that worked for everyone. But instead, you decided you knew what was best for me, better than I. You decided I was no longer capable of making rational decisions about my own life. You decided to treat me like a child who needed to be managed rather than an adult who deserved to be consulted. Sandra was quiet for a long time, studying the renovation plans. Finally, she looked up at me. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know that I'm asking because I genuinely want to understand, not because I'm trying to argue with you. Go ahead. Don't you think there might come a time when you really do need help making decisions? When your judgment might be impaired by age or illness or medication, what happens then? It was a fair question, and I appreciated that she was asking it honestly rather than using it as a weapon. Sandra, of course there might come a time when I need help. There might come a time when I need someone to manage my medications, or drive me to appointments, or help me understand complex financial documents. But that time isn't now, and when it does come, I want to be part of the conversation about what that help looks like. What do you mean? I mean, I want to be involved in choosing the person who helps me. I want to be involved in deciding what kind of help I need, and don't need. I want my preferences and wishes to be respected, even if my capabilities are diminished. I want to maintain as much control over my own life as possible, for as long as possible. And if you can't recognize when you need help, then I want people around me who have proven they can be trusted to act in my best interests, not their own convenience. I want people who have shown me that they see me as a whole person, not just a collection of problems to be solved. Sandra's eyes filled with tears again. And right now, we're not those people. Right now, you've shown me that when faced with a difficult situation involving my care, your first instinct is to find the easiest solution for yourselves, not the best solution for me. You've shown me that you're willing to lie to courts and doctors to get what you want. You've shown me that you see my independence as a threat rather than something to be protected and preserved. How do we change that? How do we prove to you that we can be trusted? By starting to treat me with respect now, while I'm still fully capable of demanding, by accepting that I have the right to make decisions you don't like, by supporting my choices, even when you don't understand them, by proving that you can put my well-being ahead of your convenience. The visiting restriction, that you understand this isn't a negotiation where you can pressure me into doing what you want, that you're willing to accept consequences for your actions, and work to rebuild trust rather than demanding forgiveness you haven't earned. Sandra stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where several residents were now gathered around a table, playing cards in the afternoon sun. They look happy, she said quietly. They are happy. For the first time in months, some of them are happy. Miss Chian in room 12 told me this morning that she feels like she matters again. Mr. Rodriguez in room 18 said he's excited about the art classes we're planning to offer. Miss Patterson, the woman you saw earlier, told me she feels safe here for the first time since she was diagnosed with dementia. And you, are you happy? I joined her at the window watching as one of the residents, a man named Frank, who had been a college professor before retiring, helped another resident with what looked like a crossword puzzle. Sandra, I'm more than happy. I'm fulfilled, I'm useful. I'm making a difference in people's lives. I'm using skills I've spent decades developing to solve problems that matter. I'm building something that will outlast me and help thousands of people over the years to come, even if it means giving up your house, your old life. My old life was shrinking every day. Every time one of you helped me by taking over something I used to do myself, my world got a little smaller. Every time you made a decision for me instead of with me, I became a little less of the person I used to. This, I gestured toward the window, toward the facility, toward the plans spread out on my desk. This is expansion. This is growth. This is the opposite of shrinking. Sandra turned away from the window and faced me directly. Mom, I want to apologize. Not because I think it will change anything, but because you deserve to hear it. We were wrong. We were selfish, and controlling and disrespectful. We treated you like a burden instead of our mother. We tried to solve our own anxiety about your aging by taking away your agency, and that was inexcusable. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation, but saw only genuine remorse, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. I accept your apology, Sandra, but I need you to understand that accepting an apology doesn't mean things go back to the way they were. It means we start over, with new rules and new boundaries, and new ways of relating to each other. What kind of new rules? Rules like you ask before you assume, you consult before you decide, you respect my choices even when you don't agree with them, you see me as a partner in decisions about my life, not an obstacle to be overcome, and the visiting restriction will be reconsidered when I'm confident that you understand why they were necessary in the first place. Sandra nodded slowly. Can I ask you one more favor? What? Can I meet some of the residents? Can you introduce me to some of the people you're helping? I think I need to understand what this place means to them. What you mean to them? I considered her request. It could be another manipulation, another attempt to find an angle she could use to pressure me, but it could also be genuine curiosity, a real desire to understand what I was building here. All right, I said finally, but we do this my way. You don't ask them personal questions about their families, you don't treat them like exhibits in a zoo, you treat them like the complex, interesting, valuable human beings they are. I will, I promise. We left my office and walked back toward the main common area, where the afternoon activities were in full swing. In one corner, a group of women were working on a quilting project, their hands moving with the precision that comes from decades of practice. In another, several men were engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion about baseball statistics. Near the windows, a small group was listening to a woman read from what looked like a mystery novel. I approached the quilting group first. Ladies, I'd like you to meet my daughter Sandra. Sandra, this is Margaret, who retired after 30 years of teaching high school English. This is Dorothy, who raised 5 children and ran her own catering business. And this is Helen, who was a nurse practitioner before nurse practitioners were common. Sandra shook hands with each woman, and I watched as her preconceptions began to crumble. These weren't frail, confused elderly people waiting to die. These were accomplished women with rich histories and active minds, women who happened to need some assistance with daily living, but who were still fundamentally themselves. "What are you working on?" Sandra asked, genuinely curious about the quilt spread across their laps. "It's a memory quilt," Margaret explained. "Each square represents a different resident's story. We interview them about their lives, then create a square that captures something important about their experience. This square here," Dorothy added, pointing to a beautifully detailed piece, "represents Mr. Kowalski's 40 years as a baker. His granddaughter sent us photos of his old shop, and we recreated the storefront in fabric. And this one," Helen said, indicating another square, "is for Miss Tanaka, who was an interpreter during World War II. She helped reunite families after the war ended." Sandra stared at the quilt, clearly amazed by the complexity and thoughtfulness of the project. "How long have you been working on this?" "About 6 months," Margaret said. "But now that Miss Miller is here, we're hoping to expand it. She's promised to help us create a permanent display in the new community center she's building." "You're building a community center?" Sandra asked, turning to me. "It's part of the renovation plan, a space where residents can pursue hobbies, attend lectures, participate in educational programs, a place where they can continue learning and growing instead of just existing." We moved on to the men's group, where the baseball discussion had evolved into a broader conversation about changes in professional sports over the decade. One of the men, a retired sports writer named Joe, was regaling the others with stories about interviewing famous players in the 1970s and 80s. "Joe," I said, interrupting the conversation politely, "I'd like you to meet my daughter Sandra." Joe stood up with the kind of old-fashioned courtesy that was becoming rare in the world. "Pleasure to meet you, young lady. Your mother's quite a woman. In 24 hours, she's done more to improve this place than the previous owners did in 5 years." "What kinds of improvement?" Sandra asked. "Well, for starters, she's hired 2 new activity coordinators and a full-time social worker. She's also arranging for weekly visits from therapy dogs, and she's working with the local community college to set up educational programs where residents can audit classes or attend lectures." Another man, Frank, the former professor I'd seen helping with the crossword puzzle, leaned forward. "But the best thing she's done is treat us like adults, like people with brains and opinions and experiences worth sharing. The previous administration treated us like children who needed to be entertained and medicated, and kept quiet." "How so?" Sandra asked. "They had activities, sure, but they were all passive: bingo, movie nights, sing-alongs, nothing that challenged us intellectually or allowed us to contribute our knowledge and skills to the community. Whereas now," Frank smiled, "now I'm working with Miss Miller to develop a oral history project where residents interview each other about their life experiences. We're creating an archive that will be donated to the local historical society. My expertise in research and documentation is actually useful again." We spent another hour moving through the facility, meeting residents and staff members, learning about the programs and improvements that were already underway. With each conversation, I watched Sandra's understanding deep. She began to see what I was building here wasn't just a business venture or a dramatic gesture. It was a community, a place where aging didn't mean irrelevance, where needing assistance didn't mean losing dignity. As we walked back toward my office, Sandra was quiet, processing what she'd seen and heard. "Mom," she said finally, "I had no idea. I thought nursing homes were just places where old people went to wait to die. Many of them are, unfortunately, but they don't have to be. With proper funding, good management, and a commitment to seeing residents as whole people, they can be places where people continue to live meaningful lives. And you're doing this because we tried to put you in one of the bad ones." "I'm doing this because when I looked at the nursing home you chose for me, I saw all the ways it was failing the people who lived there. I saw an opportunity to do better, to create something that would serve not just me, but everyone who finds themselves in similar circumstances." We had reached my office again, and Sandra paused at the door. "Mom, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Do you forgive us? I mean, I know you're still angry, and I know we have to earn back your trust, but underneath all of that, do you still love us? Do you still want us to be part of your life? I looked at this woman, my daughter, who had spent the afternoon genuinely trying to understand what I was building here. She had asked good questions, listened carefully to the answers, and shown respect for the residents and staff members she'd met. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I saw glimpses of the child I'd raised, the one who was curious about the world, and eager to learn from her mistakes. Sandra, I will always love you, all three of you, but love isn't enough to sustain a relationship. There has to be respect, trust, and mutual consideration. There has to be a willingness to see each other as separate, autonomous individuals rather than extensions of ourselves. And you don't think we see you that way? I think you've forgotten how to see me that way. I think somewhere along the line, I stopped being Dovie Miller, the woman who built a successful career and raised 3 children, and managed a household, and navigated all the challenges of adult life. I became just Mom, the woman whose only remaining purpose was to make your lives easier and not cause you any inconvenience. How do we change that? By starting to see me as a complete person again. By recognizing that I have interests and goals and dreams that don't revolve around being your mother. By accepting that I might make choices you don't understand or agree with, and supporting those choices anyway. Sandra nodded thoughtfully. The visiting restrictions you've implemented, how long will they stay in place? Until I'm confident that you and your brothers understand why they were necessary. Until I believe that you've learned to respect my autonomy and my right to set boundaries. Until I'm sure that if I invite you back into my life fully, you won't immediately start trying to manage and control me again. And how will you know when we've reached that point? I'll know because you'll stop asking me when the restrictions will be lifted. You'll stop trying to negotiate your way back into my good graces. You'll start focusing on changing your own behavior instead of trying to change my mind. Sandra was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the garden where the late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the walking paths. Mom, she said finally, I want to ask you something, but I'm afraid of how you might answer. Ask anyway. If we do the work, if we change, if we prove to you that we can respect your independence and treat you like the capable adult you are, will there be room for us in this new life you're building? I considered her question carefully. It would be easy to say yes, to offer her the reassurance she was looking for, but that would be doing exactly what I'd accused them of doing to me, making decisions based on what was easiest rather than what was honest. Sandra, I honestly don't know if we can rebuild a relationship that works for all of us, but I do know that if we have any chance of doing so, it has to start with all of you accepting that I've changed. I'm not the same woman I was 6 months ago. I'm not the same mother you've always known. I'm stronger now, more independent, more willing to prioritize my own needs and happiness, and that scares us. I know it does, because a strong independent mother is harder to manage than a weak dependent one. But Sandra, strength and independence aren't things that happen to other people. They're things that happen to the people you love too, and if you really love someone, you celebrate their strength rather than trying to diminish it. Even when their strength makes your life more complicated, especially then. Sandra stood up and walked to the door, then turned back to face me. Mom, I'm going to go home now, and I'm going to think about everything I've seen and heard today. I'm going to have some very difficult conversations with Michael and David, and then we're going to figure out how to be better. That's all I can ask for. The visiting hours, Sundays from 2 to 4, for now, yes, we'll be here this Sunday, all 3 of us, and we'll follow whatever rules you've established. We won't argue or negotiate or try to pressure you, we'll just visit. She paused at the door. Yes, bring Travis next time. I'd like to see my grandson. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, she smiled, not the forced, patronizing smile she'd been giving me for months, but a real smile, warm and genuine, and full of something that might have been hope. After she left, I sat alone in my office as the sun set outside my window. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new opportunities to prove that buying Sunset Manor had been about more than just teaching my children a lesson. It had been about reclaiming my life, my purpose, my right to determine my own future. I thought about Miss Patterson, waiting for a daughter who might never come. I thought about the residents I'd met today, people with rich histories and continuing stories, who had been warehoused and forgotten by families who found their aging inconvenient. I thought about all the other elderly people out there, facing the same battles I'd faced, struggling to maintain their dignity and independence in a world that seemed determined to diminish both. Tomorrow I would continue the work of transforming Sunset Manor into the kind of place where aging didn't mean disappearing. But tonight I would simply sit in my new office, in my new home, in my new life, and appreciate the fact that for the first time in years, I was exactly where I chose to be. The morning sun filtered through the Venetian blinds of my office, casting geometric patterns across the mahogany desk where I'd spread out the staff evaluation report. It had been 4 days since Sandra's visit, and I was discovering that running a nursing home required the kind of multitasking skills I hadn't used since my days managing 3 hospital departments simultaneously. The difference was that back then, I was accountable to a board of directors and shareholders. Now I was accountable to 37 residents who had entrusted me with their daily lives and futures. I looked up from the reports as Janet knocked on my doorframe. She held a steaming cup of coffee, and wore the kind of expression that suggested she had news I needed to hear. "Mrs. Miller, we have a situation developing," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Mrs. Patterson's daughter called this morning." I set down my pen, giving Janet my full attention.
Mrs. Patterson was the woman with dementia who had been asking for her daughter Susan during Sandra's visit. According to the records, Susan hadn't visited in 6 months, but Mrs. Patterson asked for her daily, sometimes hourly. "What did she say?" "She wants to schedule a meeting with you. Apparently, she heard through some family network that there's been a change in ownership here, and she's concerned about her mother's care." I leaned back in my chair, studying Janet's expression. Concerned how? She didn't specify, but she seemed agitated. "She mentioned something about visiting policies and asked if it was true that you've restricted family access to residents." Word was getting out about the changes I'd implemented. I'd expected this, but I'd hoped to have more time to establish the new programs before dealing with suspicious family members who might view any change as a threat to their carefully arranged status quo. "Did she mention when she'd like to meet?" "She's driving up from Portland this afternoon. She'll be here around 2 o'clock. "And when was her last visit?" Janet consulted her notes. "According to our logs, she last visited on October 15th. It's now March 22nd. 5 months. Miss Patterson had been asking for her daughter every day for 5 months, and Susan had been too busy with her important lawyer life to make the 3-hour drive to see her mother. But now that there was a new owner who might disrupt her comfortable arrangement of benign neglect, she was suddenly concerned about her mother's welfare. "Schedule the meeting," I said, "but I want you to pull Mrs. Patterson's complete file for medical records, incident reports, family contact logs, everything. And I want to talk to the staff members who work most closely with her." "Already done," Janet said, producing a thick manila folder. "I thought you might want to review everything before the meeting." I spent the next hour reading through Mrs. Patterson's file, and what I found made my chest tight with anger. Eleanor Patterson was 79 years old, a retired school librarian, who had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's disease 3 years ago. She'd lived independently until 18 months ago, when she'd had a minor car accident that prompted her daughter to move her into assisted living. The progression notes showed a woman who had been relatively stable for months, participating in activities, maintaining friendships with other residents, requiring minimal assistance with daily tasks. Then, about 6 months ago, around the time Susan's visits had stopped, Miss Patterson had begun experiencing increased confusion and agitation. The staff notes documented daily episodes of distress, calling for her daughter, becoming upset when told Susan wasn't coming that day. More troubling were the medication records. Miss Patterson had been started on anti-anxiety medication 6 months ago to manage her agitation. The dosage had been increased twice since then. Reading between the lines, it appeared that rather than addressing the root cause of Patterson's distress,
The previous administration had simply medicated her into compliance. I was still reviewing the file when Janet returned with Maria Santos, one of the certified nursing assistants who worked most closely with Mrs. Patterson. "Maria," I said, gesturing for her to sit down, "tell me about Mrs. Patterson. What's she like when she's having a good day?" Maria's face brightened. "Oh, Mrs. Patterson is wonderful when she's calm. She tells the most amazing stories about the children who used to come to her library. She remembers every book she ever recommended, every child she helped learn to read. She's so gentle and funny, and she still has this way of making you feel like you're the most important person in the world when she's talking to you. And on her difficult days," Maria's expression grew sad, "she gets so confused about time. She'll wake up thinking Susan is coming for Sunday dinner, like they used to do before she moved here. She'll get dressed in her nicest clothes and wait by the window. When Susan doesn't come, Mrs. Patterson starts to panic. She thinks something terrible has happened, that there's been an accident, that Susan needs her help." "How do you handle those episodes?" "We try to redirect her attention, get her involved in activities. Sometimes that works, but lately, she's been so agitated that we have to call the doctor for medication. It breaks my heart because she's not really upset about being here or about her condition. She's upset because she thinks her daughter is in trouble and she can't help her." I closed the file and looked at both women. "Has Susan ever given you any indication of why she visits so infrequently?" Janet and Maria exchanged glances. "She's called a few times," Janet said carefully. "She always says she's very busy with work, that she's trying to arrange her schedule to visit soon. She asks about her mother's condition, but the conversations are usually brief." "What about other family members? Does Mrs. Patterson have anyone else?" "No immediate family, Maria. There was a sister, but she passed away last year. Mrs. Patterson has some cousins, but they live across the country. Susan is really her only regular contact with the outside world." I thanked them both, and asked Janet to let me know when Susan arrived. Then I returned to Miss Patterson's file, this time, focusing on the financial records. What I found there explained a lot about Susan's visiting pattern. Mrs. Patterson's care was being paid for through a combination of her late husband's pension, Social Security, and a long-term care insurance policy. The total monthly cost was substantial, but it was being covered without any financial contribution from Susan. In fact, according to the notes, Susan had specifically requested that all bills and communications be sent directly to her office, so her mother wouldn't be burdened with financial concern. Translation: Susan had found a way to ensure her mother was cared for, without requiring any ongoing investment of time, energy or money from herself. Mrs. Patterson was safely contained, professionally managed, and completely dependent on staff members for emotional support and human connection. It was exactly the kind of arrangement my own children had been trying to create for me. At exactly 2 o'clock, Janet escorted a tall blonde woman in an expensive business suit to my office. Susan Patterson Wells looked like someone who spent her days in boardrooms and courtrooms, projecting authority and competence. She also looked like someone who was prepared for a fight. "Mrs. Patterson Wells," I said, standing to greet her. "I'm Dovie Miller. Thank you for coming." She shook my hand with a firm grip, her eyes already scanning my office, taking inventory of my diplomas and certifications. "Mrs. Miller, I have to say, I was surprised to learn about the change in ownership. My mother has been settled here for 18 months, and I'm concerned about any disruption to her routine." "Please, sit down," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "I'd like to discuss your concerns, but first, I'd love to hear about your mother. Tell me about Eleanor." Susan looked momentarily thrown by the question. "My mother, well, she has Alzheimer's disease, early to moderate stage. She requires supervised care, but is still relatively functional." "What was she like before her diagnosis?" "Before, she was a librarian, very organized, very social. She loved books, and children, and Susan's voice trailed off, as if she'd suddenly realized she was talking about her mother as a person rather than as a medical condition. "She sounds wonderful," I said. "She must have touched a lot of lives during her career." "Yes, she did. The children in our town adored her. She had this way of finding exactly the right book for each child, matching their interests and reading level perfectly. She knew every regular patron by name, remembered their preferences, always had recommendations ready. That's a remarkable skill, the ability to really see people as individuals, to understand what they need and respond to it appropriately. Susan nodded, and for a moment her professional facade softened. She was the person everyone went to when they needed help finding information, settling arguments, or just someone to listen. Our house was always full of people, neighbors and colleagues, and former students, who would stop by just to chat with her. It sounds like she was very connected to her community. She was the heart of it. Really. Susan's voice grew wistful, then suddenly snapped back to business mode. But that was before. Now she needs professional care, and I want to make sure she's receiving. Tell me about your visiting routine with her. Susan's posture stiffened. I visit when I can. My practice is very demanding, and the drive from Portland is difficult to manage with my schedule. How often are you able to make the trip? As often as possible. Every few months, when I can arrange coverage for my cases. I consulted the visitor log in front of me. According to our records, your last visit was 5 months ago. That sounds about right. Like I said, my schedule is very demanding. I'm sure it is. Can you tell me how your mother responds when you do visit? She's usually confused about who I am at first, but she seems pleased to have company. We don't usually stay long because she gets tired easily. I thought about Miss Patterson sitting by the window every day waiting for a daughter who came 4 times a year and stayed for brief, impersonal visits. I thought about the medication she was receiving to manage agitation that was really just heartbreak. Susan, can I ask you something? Do you think your mother is happy here? The question seemed to catch her off guard. Happy? I don't know. She's safe. She's receiving appropriate care. Her medical needs are being met. But is she happy? Susan was quiet for a long moment. Miss Miller, my mother has Alzheimer's disease. I'm not sure happiness is really the primary concern anymore. The priority is keeping her safe and comfortable. Why can't it be both? Because happiness requires cognitive function that she no longer has. She doesn't remember conversations from one day to the next. She gets confused about where she is and what year it is. She sometimes doesn't recognize me when I visit. Given those limitations, the best we can do is ensure her physical needs are met, and she's protected from harm. I leaned forward slightly. Susan, what if I told you that your mother talks about you every day, that she remembers stories about your childhood, your career, your wedding, that she keeps a photograph of you on her nightstand and tells anyone who will listen how proud she is of her daughter, the lawyer? Susan's composure cracked slightly. She does that every day. She also waits by the window every Sunday, dressed in her best clothes, because she believes you're coming for dinner. When you don't arrive, she becomes distressed because she thinks something terrible has happened to you. I didn't know that. The staff has been medicating her for agitation, but the agitation isn't caused by her disease. It's caused by missing you. It's caused by loving someone who has essentially disappeared from her life. Susan's face went pale. Mrs. Miller, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I haven't disappeared from her life. I call to check on her care. I make sure her bills are paid. I speak with her doctors regularly. But you don't spend time with her. I visit when I can. 4 times in 18 months. My practice requires— Susan, I interrupted gently. What kind of law do you practice? Family law, divorce, custody, estate plan. So you spend your days helping other families navigate difficult transitions, protecting children's interests, ensuring that people's wishes are respected and their needs are met. Yes, and you're good at it. I'm very good at it. I've built a successful practice helping families through some of the most challenging periods of their lives. Then you understand the importance of maintaining relationships, of ensuring that people feel heard and valued and loved, especially during times of crisis or transition. Susan was quiet, staring at her hands. Mrs. Miller, what exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that your mother doesn't need less of you because she has Alzheimer's disease. She needs more of you. She needs consistency, connection, the reassurance that the most important relationship in her life hasn't been abandoned just because she requires care. But she doesn't remember my visits from one day to the next. Susan, do you remember every conversation you had with your mother when you were 5 years old? Of course not. But do you remember how those conversations made you feel? Do you remember feeling loved and valued and important to her? Yeah, memory isn't just about retaining facts and events, it's about emotional patterns, about the accumulation of experiences that shape how we feel about ourselves and the world around us. Your mother may not remember the details of your visits, but she remembers the feeling of being important to someone, of having a daughter who cares enough to show up regularly. Susan was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks, her professional composure completely shattered. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought by ensuring she had professional care, by handling all the logistics and finances, I was taking care of her. You were taking care of her physical needs. But Susan, your mother spent her entire career understanding that people need more than just their basic requirements met. They need connection, purpose, the sense that they matter to someone. I don't know how to visit someone who doesn't remember me. You visit the same way you always do. You talk to her about your life, ask about her day, share memories, bring photos. You sit with her in comfortable silence. You treat her like the intelligent, loving woman she's always been, even if that woman is sometimes hidden by confusion and fear. What if she doesn't recognize me? Then you introduce yourself. Hi Mom, it's Susan, I'm your daughter, and I love you. Most of the time, even when the cognitive recognition isn't there, the emotional recognition is. She may not remember your name, but she'll remember the feeling of being loved by you. Susan wiped her eyes with a tissue from the box on my desk. Mrs. Miller, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Why are you doing this? Why do you care so much about my mother specifically, or any of the residents here? You could have bought any business, made any investment. Why a nursing home? I thought about my own children, about the guardianship papers and the assumption that loving someone gave you the right to control them. I thought about Mrs. Patterson waiting by the window, and Chun talking about feeling invisible, and all the other residents who had been warehoused by families who confused caring for someone with caring about someone. Because, Susan, 6 months ago I was almost in your mother's position. My children decided I was too old and too much trouble to live independently. They tried to put me in a facility just like this one, without asking what I wanted or needed or preferred. They assumed that because I required some assistance, I no longer deserved autonomy or respect, or the right to make my own decisions. What happened? I fought back. I refused to disappear quietly. I refused to accept that needing help meant losing my dignity, or my independence, or my right to be treated like a complete human being. And now you're here, now I'm here, creating the kind of place I would want to live if I ever needed this level of care. A place where aging doesn't mean becoming invisible, where requiring assistance doesn't mean losing your voice, where families are encouraged to stay connected rather than feeling relieved that they can delegate their loved one's care to someone else. Susan was quiet for a long time, absorbing what I'd said. Finally, she looked up at me. Mrs. Miller, what changes are you planning to implement here? I pulled out the folder of renovation plans and program descriptions I'd been developing. We're completely renovating the common areas to create spaces that encourage social interaction and intellectual stimulation. We're hiring additional staff, including a full-time social worker and activity coordinator. We're partnering with the local community college to offer educational programs, and we're creating a therapeutic garden where residents can participate in horticultural activities. And the visiting policy. We're implementing structured visiting hours that ensure residents have predictable, regular contact with their families while also protecting their right to privacy and routine. What does that mean exactly? It means that families who demonstrate consistent, meaningful engagement with their loved ones will have expanded access and privileges. Families who visit sporadically or treat the facility like a storage unit for inconvenient relatives will have more limited access until they demonstrate a genuine commitment to maintaining the relationship. Susan's lawyer instincts kicked in. That seems potentially discriminatory. It's not about discrimination, Susan. It's about protecting vulnerable people from emotional abandonment, disguised as professional care. Your mother doesn't need a case manager. She needs a daughter. She doesn't need someone to handle her logistics. She needs someone to share her life with, even in its current limited form. What would meaningful engagement look like for someone in my situation? It would look like visiting regularly enough that your mother could anticipate seeing you. It would look like staying long enough to have genuine conversations, to participate in activities together, to simply be present with her. It would look like treating her like your mother, instead of like a client whose file you need to review periodically. How often is regular? That depends on your circumstances, but I'd suggest at least twice a month. Long enough visits that she can relax into your presence instead of feeling like she's being checked on and dismissed. Susan was quiet again, thinking. Mrs. Miller, can I see her? Can I visit with her now? Of course, but Susan, I want you to approach this visit differently than you have been. Don't treat it like a medical consultation, treat it like spending time with someone you love. I walked Susan to the memory care unit, where we found Miss Patterson in the common area, working on a puzzle with 2 other residents. She looked up as we approached, and her face lit up with recognition and joy. Susan! Oh Susan, you came. I knew you would come today. I told everyone you were coming today. Susan knelt down beside her mother's chair, and I watched as 18 months of professional distance melted away. Hi Mom. Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry it took me so long. It's all right, sweetheart. You're here now. Do you want to help us with this puzzle? It's a picture of a garden, and it's very difficult, but we're making good progress. For the next hour I watched Susan rediscover her mother. Not the confused patient who required management, but the warm, intelligent woman who had raised her, who had taught her to read, who had celebrated every milestone of her life. Mrs. Patterson didn't remember that Susan hadn't visited in 5 months. She only knew that her daughter was here now, sitting beside her, laughing at her stories, helping with the puzzle. When the visit ended, Susan hugged her mother goodbye and promised to return soon. Mrs. Patterson beamed. Sunday dinner? She asked hopefully. I can't make it this Sunday, Mom, but I'll be back very soon. I promise. As we walked back toward my office, Susan was quiet, processing what she'd experienced. Finally she turned to me. Mrs. Miller, I've been doing this all wrong, haven't I? You've been doing what you thought was right, based on what you understood about your mother's condition, but now you understand more. She's still there. She's still my mother, just different. Exactly. The core of who she is, the love she has for you, the pride she takes in your accomplishments, the joy she feels when she sees you, none of that has changed. It's just harder to access sometimes. What do I need to do to be part of your new program here, to have expanded visiting privileges? You need to commit to visiting her regularly and meaningfully. You need to treat her like family, not like a patient. You need to understand that your presence in her life isn't just a nice gesture when you have time. It's essential to her well-being, and if I do, then you'll be welcome here anytime. You'll be included in care planning decisions. You'll be treated as a partner in ensuring your mother's happiness and quality of life. Susan nodded thoughtfully. I'd like that. I'd like to try to do better. Good. Because Susan, your mother isn't the only one who's been missing out on this relationship. You've been missing out too. You've been so focused on managing her condition that you've forgotten to enjoy the woman she still is. That evening, after Susan had left with a promise to return the following weekend, I walked through the facility during the dinner shift. In the dining room, I saw Mrs. Patterson at her usual table, but tonight she was animated, talking excitedly to her table mates about her daughter's visit. She helped me with the puzzle, she was saying to anyone who would listen. She remembered how much I love gardens. She's coming back soon, maybe next week. Maria approached me as I stood watching. Mrs. Miller, I haven't seen Mrs. Patterson this happy in months. Whatever you said to her daughter, it worked. I just reminded her that love isn't something you delegate to professionals, it's something you show up for, even when it's difficult. Later that night, I sat in my office, reviewing the files of other residents, whose families had fallen into similar patterns of benign neglect. There was Mr. Rodriguez, whose son called monthly but hadn't visited in a year. There was Miss Chen, whose daughters lived locally but only came for holidays. There was Frank, whose children had explicitly asked the staff not to call them unless there was a medical emergency. Each file told the same story: families who had convinced themselves that providing professional care was equivalent to providing love, who had delegated the emotional work of maintaining relationships to people who were paid to provide physical assistance.
Tomorrow, I would begin reaching out to these families, having conversations similar to the one I'd had with Susan.
Some would respond positively, grateful for the opportunity to reconnect with their loved ones. Others would resist, preferring the convenience of professional management to the messiness of actual relationships. But I was determined to create a place where residents were seen as whole people deserving of love and connection, not just bodies requiring care. A place where families were encouraged to stay involved, to continue growing and changing together, to find new ways of relating, even when old patterns no longer worked. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Sandra. "Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation. Can we talk on Sunday when I visit?" I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Yes, we can talk." It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't a return to the way things used to be. But it was a beginning, a recognition that relationships could evolve and improve, that people could learn from their mistakes and do better. As I prepared to leave my office and walk to my temporary living quarters, I looked out the window at the garden where tomorrow, weather permitting, Miss Patterson would sit with her new puzzle book, maybe telling other residents about her daughter's visit, maybe already looking forward to the next one. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt like I was building something that would outlast the circumstances that had created it, something that would serve not just me, but everyone who found themselves navigating the complex territory between independence and dependence, between caring for someone and caring about them. It was exactly the kind of legacy I wanted to leave behind. 3 days later, I was in the activities room observing the first session of our new book club, when Janet found me with an urgent expression on her face. The book club had been my idea, a way to capitalize on the intellectual curiosity that many residents still possessed, despite their physical limitations. Miss Patterson was there, of course, along with Margaret from the quilting group and several other residents who had jumped at the chance to discuss literature again. "Mrs. Miller," Janet said quietly, approaching my chair, "you have visitor. Your other 2 children are here, and they're asking to see you immediately. Michael and David." I'd been expecting this visit since Sandra had left earlier in the week. Word had undoubtedly gotten back to them about the changes she'd witnessed, the conversations we'd had, the possibility that their carefully orchestrated intervention was unraveling. "Where are they?" "In the lobby. They seemed—" I looked around the book club, where Frank was leading a spirited discussion about the themes in the novel they'd chosen for their first selection. These people had been given so little opportunity for intellectual engagement in recent months. I wasn't about to cut short one of the first meaningful activities they'd participated in, just because my children had decided to stage another confrontation. "Tell them I'll meet with them in 1 hour. I'm currently involved in resident activities, and those take priority." Janet looked surprised. "Should I tell them you're in a meeting?" "No. Tell them exactly what I said. That I'm participating in resident activities, and those take priority over unscheduled family visits." I returned my attention to the book discussion, but I could feel the tension building in my chest. Michael and David showing up together, unannounced, suggested they were here to present a united front, probably with lawyers in tow, ready to challenge my ownership of the facility or my mental competency or both. When the book club ended an hour later, I walked slowly toward the lobby, mentally preparing for whatever confrontation awaited me. I found Michael pacing near the reception desk while David sat in one of the visitor chairs, scrolling through his phone. Both looked up as I approached, and I could see the barely contained frustration in their expression. "Mom," Michael said, his voice tight with controlled anger, "we need to talk. Privately." "Good afternoon to you too, Michael." "David." I nodded to each of them. "I understand you'd like to meet. My office is available." We walked in tense silence through the hallways of Sunset Manor. I noticed David's eyes taking in the improvements that were already visible. The fresh paint, the new artwork, the sounds of laughter coming from the activities room. Michael, on the other hand, seemed to be cataloging potential problems, his lawyer mind already building whatever case he planned to present. In my office, they both remained standing while I settled behind my desk. Michael pulled out a folder and placed it on the desk between us. "Mom, we've had the sale of this facility reviewed by a real estate attorney. We think there are grounds to challenge the transaction based on your mental state at the time of purchase." I leaned back in my chair, unsurprised but disappointed.
On what ground? On the grounds that buying a nursing home as a response to being placed in one is clearly not the action of someone thinking rationally. On the grounds that you've made a series of increasingly erratic decisions that suggest compromised judgment, such as liquidating significant portions of your retirement savings to buy a failing business in an industry you have no experience managing. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out my own folder, one considerably thicker than Michael. Actually, I have 40 years of experience in healthcare administration, including direct oversight of 3 different long-term care facilities during my tenure at regional healthcare system. I've also had this purchase reviewed by 2 independent business attorneys and a financial advisor, all of whom concluded that it was a sound investment, with significant potential for growth. Michael's confidence wavered slightly, but he pressed on. Mom, this isn't about your qualification, this is about your motivation. You bought this place out of spite, to get back at us for trying to help you. Did I? Or did I buy this place because I recognized a business opportunity and had the resources and expertise to pursue it? David finally spoke up. Mom, can we please just talk about this like a family? Can we put aside the lawyers and the business arguments, and just discuss what's really happening here? I turned my attention to him. What do you think is really happening here, Dave? I think you're hurt and angry, and you're making decisions based on emotion rather than logic. I think you're trying to prove a point, instead of trying to solve a problem. And what problem am I supposed to be solving? The problem of how we take care of you as you get old. The problem of ensuring your safety and well-being. The problem of managing your care when you can no longer manage it yourself. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where several residents were taking their afternoon walk. David, do you see those people out there? He joined me at the window. Yes. What do you see when you look at them? I see elderly people who need assistance with daily living. Look again, really look. David stared out the window for a long moment. I see people walking and talking. Some of them are laughing. You see people living their lives, people who happen to be elderly, and happen to need some assistance, but who are still fundamentally themselves. People who have opinions and preferences and relationships and interests that matter to them. Okay, but what does that have to do with our situation? I turned back to face both of my sons. It has everything to do with our situation. You've been looking at me the same way you were looking at those residents a moment ago. You see an elderly woman who needs assistance, and you've decided that needing assistance means I've lost the right to make my own decisions about how that assistance is provided. Michael stepped forward. Mom, we're not trying to take away your rights, we're trying to protect you. From making mistakes that could hurt you. From being taken advantage of by people who see you as vulnerable. From the consequences of poor judgment that might come with aging. And who decides what constitutes poor judgment? People who love you and want what's best for you. No, Mike, people who love me and want what's best for me, ask me what I think is best for me. They include me in the decision-making process. They respect my autonomy even when they disagree with my choices. I returned to my desk and opened the folder I'd prepared. Let me show you what I've accomplished in the week since I took ownership of this facility. I spread out financial reports, staffing plans, renovation schedules, and program descriptions across the desk. I've increased staff wages by 15% and reduced turnover to 0. I've implemented new activity programs that have increased resident participation by over 60%. I've established partnerships with local organizations that will provide ongoing educational and social opportunity. I've improved the quality of food service and reduced medication usage for behavioral issues by 40%. David stared at the documents. Mom, this is what happens when someone with experience and resources decides to tackle a problem systematically instead of just throwing money at it and hoping it goes away. Michael was scanning the financial projections. These numbers, if they're accurate, you've increased the facility's projected revenue by 30%, while improving care quality. They're accurate. They're also conservative. I believe we can do even better once all the renovations are complete and the new programs are fully implemented. But why, Mom? Why did you choose this particular business? I sat down and looked at both of them directly. Because this is what you chose for me. You decided I belonged in a nursing home, and you chose one that was adequate but uninspiring.
a place where I would be safe and managed and slowly forgot. So I decided to create the kind of nursing home I would actually want to live in. You're really planning to live here permanently? David asked. I'm planning to live here as long as it serves my needs and interests. If I eventually require more care than I can manage independently, I'll transition to being a resident, rather than just the owner. But David, I'll make that decision when the time comes, based on my actual capabilities and needs, not on your anxiety about my potential future limitations. Michael was quiet for a long time, studying the business plan I'd laid out. Finally, he looked up at me. Mom, I have to admit, this is not what I expected to find here. What did you expect to find? I expected to find a confused woman making irrational decisions based on hurt feelings. Instead, I'm looking at a comprehensive business plan that demonstrates exactly the kind of strategic thinking and industry knowledge you've always had. I'm the same woman I was 6 months ago, Michael. The same woman I was when you filed guardianship papers claiming I was no longer competent to manage my own affairs. We made a mistake, David said quietly. We panicked about losing you, and we tried to control the situation instead of working with you to address our concerns. Yes, you did, Mom, Michael said. If we acknowledge that we made mistakes, if we apologize and commit to doing better, is there any way we can rebuild our relationship? I thought about Susan Patterson, sitting with her mother, rediscovering the woman she'd almost lost through professional management. I thought about Mrs. Patterson's face lighting up when her daughter walked into the room. I thought about the possibility of healing relationships rather than just protecting myself from damaged ones. Michael, that depends entirely on whether you're willing to see me as I actually am, rather than as you think I should be. It depends on whether you can accept that I have the right to make decisions you don't understand or agree with. It depends on whether you can treat me like a partner in managing my own life, rather than a problem that needs to be solved. What would that look like, practically? It would look like asking instead of assuming, consulting instead of deciding, supporting my choices even when you have concerns about them, treating me like the capable adult I still am, even if I sometimes need assistance with certain tasks. David nodded slowly. We can do that. We want to do that. Because David, supporting my choices means accepting that I might choose to live here permanently. It means accepting that I might choose to invest my money in ways you wouldn't. It means accepting that my priorities and preferences might not match yours, and that doesn't make them wrong. Even if we think your choices might not be in your best interests, especially then, because David, I've been making my own choices for 72 years. I've made good decisions and bad decisions, and I've learned from both. I've built a successful career, raised 3 children, survived the death of my husband, and navigated all the challenges that come with being an adult in a complex world. I don't suddenly lose the right to make my own mistakes just because I'm old. Michael was reading through the visiting policy I'd implemented. Mom, about these restrictions. What about them? Michael set down the visiting policy document and looked at me with what might have been the first genuine expression I'd seen from him since this entire ordeal began. These restrictions feel punitive, Mom, like you're trying to hurt us. I considered his words carefully. There was truth in them, but not the whole truth. Michael, tell me something. When you were building your law practice, did you accept clients who called you only when they needed something, paid their bills late, and treated you with disrespect? Of course not. I fired clients who didn't value my time or expertise. Because accepting poor treatment from clients sets a precedent. It tells them that my time isn't valuable, that my professional boundaries don't matter, that they can treat me however they want without consequences. Exactly. These visiting policies aren't about punishment, Mike. They're about establishing boundaries and ensuring that the people who enter this facility understand that the residents here, including me, deserve respect and consistency. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. But we're not clients, Mom. We're your children. You're my children, which means you should be held to a higher standard than clients, not a lower one. You should be the people I can count on to show up regularly, to treat me with respect, to honor commitments you make to me. Both men looked uncomfortable, recognizing the truth in my example. I pulled out another document from my desk drawer, This is the visiting schedule for Sunset Manor's most dedicated family members. Mrs. Rodriguez's daughter Maria visits every Tuesday and Friday. Mr. Thompson's son James comes every Saturday morning and stays for lunch. Miss Walsh's daughter Patricia visits every Sunday after church and brings her grandchildren twice a month. What's your point? My point is that these families understand that maintaining a relationship requires consistency and effort. They understand that their loved ones need to be able to count on them, to anticipate their visits, to feel valued and prioritized. David leaned forward. Mom, we do value you, we do prioritize you, when it's convenient, when it fits into your schedule, when it doesn't require you to make any real sacrifices or adjustments to your lives. The silence that followed was answer enough. Michael tried a different approach. Mom, we're adults with demanding careers and families of our own. We can't be expected to visit you multiple times per week like we're teenagers still living at home. I'm not asking you to visit multiple times per week. I'm asking you to visit consistently, meaningfully, and with the understanding that I'm a priority in your lives, not an obligation you fulfill when nothing better is available. What would meaningful visiting look like to you? I thought about my conversation with Susan Patterson, about watching her rediscover her mother through genuine engagement rather than obligation-based check-ins. It would look like staying long enough to have real conversation. It would look like participating in activities here, rather than just sitting in my office discussing my medical status. It would look like getting to know the other residents and staff members, understanding what my daily life is like, being part of my community rather than visiting it like tourists. David stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where a group of residents was gathered around a table working on what appeared to be an art project. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happy here? I mean genuinely happy, not just proving a point or making the best of a bad situation. I joined him at the window watching as Mrs. Patterson helped another resident mix colors on a palette. Her face was animated, engaged, purposeful. David, I'm happier than I've been in years. For the first time since your father died, I feel like I have a purpose that matches my capabilities. I'm using skills I spent decades developing to solve problems that matter. I'm making decisions that improve people's lives in measurable ways. But don't you miss your old life? Your house, your independence, your privacy? I miss some aspects of my old life. But David, my old life was shrinking. Every time one of you helped me by taking over something I used to do myself, my world got a little smaller. Every time you made a decision for me instead of with me, I became a little less of who I used to be. Michael rejoined our conversation. Mom, what if we want to learn? What if we want to understand how to support your independence, rather than undermine it? Then you start by asking instead of assuming. You start by including me in decisions about my life, rather than making those decisions for me. You start by respecting my choices even when you don't understand them. Can you give us a specific example? Yeah, instead of researching nursing homes and presenting me with your decision, you could have said, Mom, we're concerned about you living alone. Can we discuss some options that might address our concerns while respecting your preference? Instead of filing guardianship papers, you could have asked, Mom, we're worried about your judgment on some recent decisions. Can we talk about what's driving our concerns and how we might address them together? David nodded slowly. So it's not about the outcome, it's about the process. Exactly, it's about treating me like a partner and managing my own life, rather than a problem that needs to be solved by other people. Michael was taking notes now, his legal training kicking in. What other changes would you want to see in how we interact with you? I want you to stop talking about me to each other without including me in the conversation. I want you to stop making plans that affect my life without consulting. I want you to stop assuming that because I need some assistance with certain tasks, I'm no longer capable of making my own decisions about how that assistance is provided. Those seem like reasonable requests, David said. They're not requests, David. They're requirements. They're the minimum standards for how I expect to be treated by people who claim to love and respect me. A soft knock interrupted our conversation. Janet peeked in with a manila folder. Mrs. Miller, I have some wonderful news. The state inspector finished her review of our new programs, and we've received full approval for everything. She was particularly impressed with our family engagement policies. I felt a surge of pride. The state approval validated everything we'd built here, confirming that our approach wasn't just emotionally satisfying, but professionally sound. Thank you, Janet. That's excellent news. After Janet left, Michael and David looked at me with something approaching awe. Mom, Michael said, you really did it. You didn't just buy a nursing home to make a point, you actually transformed it into something exceptional. I created what I needed to exist in the world, Michael. A place where aging doesn't mean disappearing, where needing assistance doesn't mean losing dignity, where families are expected to show up meaningfully for their loved ones. David's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and smiled. It's from Sandra. She's asking if she can bring Travis this Sunday for visiting hours. She wants to introduce him to the grandmother he's been missing. I felt something warm unfold in my chest. My grandson Travis, who I hadn't seen in months because my children had decided our relationship was too complicated to maintain. Tell her yes, tell her I'd love to see him. Mom, Michael said, carefully, if we commit to this new way of relating to you, if we prove over time that we can respect your autonomy and treat you as an equal partner in our family, would you consider modifying the visiting restriction? Michael, the visiting restrictions were never meant to be permanent. They were meant to teach you that relationships require effort and consistency. Once you demonstrate that you've learned those lessons, we can discuss expanding access. How will we know when we've proven ourselves? You'll know because you'll stop asking me when the restrictions will be lifted. You'll stop trying to negotiate your way back into my good graces. You'll start focusing on building the kind of relationship that makes restrictions unnecessary. David turned from the window. Mom, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you forgive us? I mean, I know we have to earn back your trust, but underneath all of that, do you still love us? Do you still want us to be part of your life? I looked at these two men, my sons, who had spent the afternoon genuinely trying to understand what they'd done wrong, and how they could do better. They had listened without defensiveness, acknowledged their mistakes without excuses, and shown me the kind of respect I'd been demanding for months. David, I will always love you, all three of you, but love isn't enough to sustain a relationship. There has to be respect, trust, and mutual consideration. There has to be a willingness to see each other as separate, autonomous individuals, rather than extensions of ourselves. And you think we can get there? I think we're already on our way there. This conversation right now is different from any conversation we've had in years. You're listening to me, really listening, instead of just waiting for your turn to explain why I'm wrong. Michael closed his notebook and looked at me directly. Mom, I want to make you a promise. We're going to do better. We're going to treat you with the respect you deserve. We're going to support your choices even when we don't understand them. And we're going to prove to you that we can be the kind of children you deserve to have. I'd like that, Michael, but remember, this isn't about being the children I deserve. It's about being the adults you want to be. It's about creating the kind of relationships that honor everyone involved. They left that afternoon with promises to return on Sunday, to follow the visiting protocols I'd established, to approach our relationship as if they were meeting me for the first time. As I watched their cars pull out of the parking lot, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope for our future together. 6 months later, I was standing in the newly completed community center at Sunset Manor, watching as residents and their families participated in our monthly celebration dinner. The space was filled with laughter, conversation, and the kind of genuine connection that had been missing from so many of these relationships for so long. Mrs. Patterson sat at a table with Susan, who now visited every other weekend and called twice weekly. They were looking through a photo album Susan had created, documenting her mother's career as a librarian. Mrs. Patterson's medication had been reduced to almost nothing, her confusion episodes were rare, and she radiated the kind of contentment that comes from feeling truly loved and valued. At another table, I saw my own family. Sandra and Travis were playing cards with 2 other residents, while Michael and David helped serve dessert to the tables around them. They had indeed learned to be different kinds of children, and I had learned to be a different kind of mother. Our relationships were no longer based on obligation and guilt, but on genuine affection and mutual respect. The article Jennifer Walsh had written about Sunset Manor had generated interest from families across the state. We now had a waiting list of potential residents, and I had been invited to speak at conferences about our family engagement model. Michael and I had indeed partnered to develop educational materials for families facing these decisions, and David had created a documentary about our approach that was being used by social work programs at 3 University. But more than any professional recognition, I was proud of what we had built here on a human level. Sunset Manor had become exactly what I had envisioned, a place where aging meant evolution rather than diminishment, where families learned to love each other better, rather than managing each other more efficiently. Janet approached me, as the evening was winding down. "Miss Miller, we just received another inquiry from a family in Seattle. They want to know if we'd be willing to consult on developing a similar program at a facility there." I smiled, thinking about all the families who might benefit from what we'd learned here. "Schedule a call with them next week. It's time to start sharing what we've built with others who need it." As the last families said their goodbyes and the residents headed to their rooms for the evening, I walked through the facility that had become my home, my purpose, and my legacy. In every room I saw evidence of lives being lived fully rather than simply managed safely. I saw dignity preserved, relationships strengthened, and potential realized rather than written off. My children had tried to put me in a nursing home, because they thought I was becoming a burden. Instead, they had given me the opportunity to create something that would help thousands of families avoid the mistakes they had made. They had tried to diminish my world, and I had used their attempt to expand it beyond anything I could have imagined. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was exactly the life I had chosen, and for the first time in years, I was exactly where I belonged. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.